London, 1824. For 5 long years, Duke Christopher Harrington had lived with only one companion, grief. His beloved wife, Lady Amelia Harrington, had supposedly died in a shipwreck while traveling to France. No body had ever been recovered. Yet everyone accepted the tragedy. Everyone except Christopher. Something deep inside him had always refused to believe she was truly gone. Still, life had moved on. Society expected him to remarry. His mother constantly introduced suitable ladies, and newspapers often called him England's most tragic widower. But Christopher never listened, because no woman could replace Amelia. She had been his entire world. One rainy afternoon, while inspecting one of his charitable foundations in London, the Duke stopped outside a small dressmaker's shop. He had intended only to escape the rain. Nothing more. But then, he heard a laugh. A familiar laugh. Christopher froze. His heart stopped. Slowly, he turned toward the sound. And through the shop window, he saw her. A woman sat beside a sewing machine, smiling warmly as she adjusted a little boy's coat. Christopher's breath caught. No! It was impossible. Impossible. Yet those golden curls, those gentle eyes, that smile, he would recognize them anywhere. Amelia! His umbrella slipped from his hand. Inside the shop, the woman looked up. Their eyes met, and the color drained from her face. For one terrible moment, neither moved. Then, to Christopher's horror, she looked frightened. Not happy, not relieved, terrified. And before he could react, she grabbed the little boy's hand and ran toward the back door. Christopher burst inside. Amelia! But she was already gone. The shop owner looked startled. Your Grace! The woman who was here, Mrs. Rose. Where did she go? The old woman frowned. Mrs. Rose. Christopher's hands trembled. Her real name is Amelia. The shopkeeper blinked. I've known her for 5 years. She's always been Mrs. Rose. And the little boy? Her son. Christopher froze. Son. The woman smiled. Sweet child. His name is Benjamin. He's 5 years old. 5 years old. Christopher's world tilted. 5 years. Exactly 5 years. And then another detail struck him. The child. The little boy had his eyes. The same gray eyes that every Harrington man had inherited for generations. His blood ran cold. No! Could it be? That evening, Christopher ordered his men to find her. But before they could leave, his loyal butler, Mr. Hughes, entered with shocking news. Your Grace. What? I know that woman. Christopher stared. What? Mr. Hughes looked pale. I saw her. 5 years ago. On the night of the shipwreck. Christopher's heart pounded. What are you saying? The old butler swallowed. I saw Lady Amelia alive. And she wasn't alone. There were 2 men with her. Christopher grabbed his shoulders. Who? But before Hughes could answer, a gunshot echoed outside the manor. Bang! The old butler collapsed to the floor, blood spreading across his chest. Christopher dropped to his knees in horror. Hughes! With his dying breath, the faithful servant whispered only 3 words. Trust? No one. And then, he was gone. Christopher Harrington sat beside the lifeless body of his old butler, Mr. Hughes, unable to comprehend what had just happened. For 30 years, Hughes had served the Harrington family with unwavering loyalty. And now he was dead, murdered, because he had recognized someone, because he knew something. But what, and who had silenced him? Only one sentence echoed in Christopher's mind. Trust no one. The authorities searched the grounds, but the shooter had vanished into the darkness. No witnesses, no clues, nothing. Officially, it was declared an act of robbery. Christopher knew better. Someone had wanted Hughes dead. Someone was terrified of the truth. And that truth somehow involved Amelia. The next morning, Christopher returned to the dressmaker's shop. This time, the owner, Mrs. Watson, looked nervous. Your Grace, I already told you. Mrs. Rose hasn't returned. Christopher placed several gold coins on the counter. I am not here to threaten anyone. His voice softened. I simply want answers. Mrs. Watson hesitated. Then tears filled her eyes. She's a good woman. She works harder than anyone I know. And that little boy, she smiled sadly. He adores his mother. Christopher's heart tightened. Please, Mrs. Watson finally whispered. She rents a cottage near Willow Creek. Less than an hour later, Christopher stood outside a small cottage covered in wildflowers. He barely had time to knock before the door opened. And there she was, Amelia, alive, beautiful, and staring at him in horror. Christopher, his eyes filled with tears. For 5 years he had dreamed of this moment. He had imagined her running into his arms, smiling, crying, calling his name. Instead, she looked terrified. Please leave, she whispered. His heart shattered. Amelia, please. No. His voice broke. No. He stepped inside. 5 years. 5 years I mourned you. 5 years I visited your grave. 5 years I prayed for one more chance. Tears streamed down his face. Tell me why. Amelia began crying. I can't. You can. No. Amelia. I can't. At that moment, small footsteps echoed from the hallway. A little boy appeared. The same child Christopher had seen in the shop. Benjamin. The child looked curiously at the stranger. Then his gray eyes widened. Exactly like Christopher's. The Duke's breath caught. Even his smile, his hair, everything. Benjamin looked up at Amelia. Mama! Christopher felt his knees weaken. Mama! He slowly knelt before the child. What is your name? Benjamin. How old are you? I'm 5. The world seemed to stop. Christopher looked at Amelia. Her silence was answer enough. He's mine. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Yes. Christopher covered his mouth. 5 years. His son. His own son. A child he had never held. Never protected. Never even known existed. Benjamin tilted his head. Mama. Why are you crying? Amelia embraced him tightly. It's nothing, sweetheart. But Christopher was already crying openly. Benjamin looked confused. Why is the man sad? The Duke forced a smile. I don't know. The little boy approached him. And without warning, Benjamin wrapped his tiny arms around Christopher's neck. It's okay. Christopher froze, then completely broke down. For the first time in years, the mighty Duke of Harrington wept. That evening, Amelia finally spoke. It wasn't an accident. Christopher looked up. The shipwreck. She nodded. No. Someone wanted me dead. Christopher's blood ran cold. What? I discovered documents proving massive fraud. Men in Parliament. Nobles. Very powerful people. They tried to silence me. Christopher stood up. Who? But Amelia shook her head. I never learned their names. The ship was sabotaged. I escaped. Everyone believed I died. And then I discovered I was pregnant. Christopher stared at her. So why didn't you come back? Fresh tears filled her eyes. Because they knew. They were watching. I received letters. Threats. They promised to kill you. And our child. Christopher felt sick. You protected us. Amelia nodded. I thought distance would keep you alive. 5 years. 5 years apart. Not because she had stopped loving him, but because she had loved him too much. Christopher took her hands. We'll face them together now. But Amelia's face suddenly turned pale. Christopher. What? Her trembling finger pointed toward the window. Outside, a black carriage stood across the road, and beside it, a tall man in a dark coat, watching the cottage, watching Benjamin, watching them. Christopher slowly turned, and the color drained from his face, because he recognized him. Lord Edward Blackthorne, his closest friend, the man he trusted more than anyone, and the very man who had arranged Amelia's journey. 5 years ago, Christopher stared through the cottage window in disbelief. Lord Edward Blackthorne, his oldest friend, the man who had stood beside him at his wedding, the man he trusted like a brother. and the man who had arranged Amelia's passage to France 5 years ago. No, Christopher whispered. It can't be. But Amelia's frightened expression said otherwise. He knows we're here, she whispered. Christopher's jaw tightened. Stay with Benjamin. Without another word, he stepped outside. Blackthorn stood beside his carriage, his cane resting casually in one hand. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then Blackthorn smiled. Christopher. Edward. Quite a surprise, isn't it? Christopher's voice turned cold. You knew she was alive. The smile faded. Yes. 5 years. 5 years, Edward. I buried an empty coffin. I mourned my wife. And my son grew up without a father. Blackthorn lowered his eyes. I know. You know? Christopher nearly exploded with rage. You know? Before he could say another word, Blackthorn quietly said, I saved her. Christopher froze. What? I saved Amelia. 5 years earlier, Blackthorn had discovered a conspiracy involving several corrupt noblemen and businessmen. Amelia had unknowingly uncovered their illegal dealings. When they realized she intended to expose them, they planned to murder her aboard the ship. Blackthorn learned of the plot too late. Unable to stop the attack openly, he staged the shipwreck and helped Amelia disappear before the killers reached her. But why didn't you tell me? Christopher demanded. Because I couldn't trust anyone. Blackthorn's voice trembled. There were spies everywhere. And if they discovered you knew the truth, they would have killed you too. Christopher stared at him. So you let me suffer. Tears appeared in Edward's eyes. I chose your pain over your death. And I hated myself for it every day. Suddenly, another carriage appeared. Then another. Men armed with pistols stepped out. Blackthorn's face changed immediately. They found us. Christopher's eyes widened. The conspirators? Blackthorn nodded. They followed me. Gunshots rang out. Bang! Bang! Inside, Blackthorn shouted. Christopher rushed toward the cottage. Terrified, Amelia grabbed Benjamin. The small family hid as bullets shattered windows. Blackthorn and Christopher fought side by side, just as they had as boys. But their enemies were too many. Then, in the distance, more horses approached. Police officers, along with soldiers. Blackthorn smiled weakly. I sent for them. The attackers attempted to flee, but within minutes they were surrounded and arrested. The conspiracy that had haunted their lives for 5 years was finally destroyed. Months later, the truth shocked England. Several influential men were imprisoned, their crimes exposed, and Lord Edward Blackthorn, though criticized for keeping Amelia's survival secret, was ultimately recognized as the man who had risked everything to save her. But for Christopher, none of that mattered, because after 5 long years, his family was finally together. Adjusting to fatherhood proved both wonderful and chaotic. Benjamin was curious about everything. He asked endless questions, climbed trees, and once released 12 chickens inside Harrington Manor. Christopher had spent years ruling estates and managing Parliament. Yet nothing had prepared him for being defeated by a 5-year-old armed with mud and endless energy. One evening, Benjamin climbed onto his father's lap. Papa, Christopher smiled. Yes. Were you really sad before? A little. Benjamin thought carefully. Don't be sad anymore. Because Mama and I came back. Tears filled Christopher's eyes. He hugged his son tightly. I promise. As for Amelia, she struggled with guilt. I stole 5 years from you. Christopher shook his head. No. You gave us a future. You protected us. And now, he gently kissed her forehead. We have the rest of our lives. On a warm spring afternoon, the gardens of Harrington Manor were filled with laughter. Benjamin chased butterflies. Amelia sat beneath a tree, sewing as she always loved to do, and Christopher simply watched them. For years, he had believed himself cursed. He had stood beside a grave and mourned a woman who wasn't gone. He had dreamed of one miracle. Instead, he had been given 2. A second chance with the woman he loved, and a son who had inherited his eyes and his heart. Benjamin suddenly ran toward him. "Papa!" Christopher lifted him into the air. "What is it, my young lord?" Benjamin grinned. "Mama says dinner is ready." Amelia laughed. "And if you don't come now, your grace, there will be no pie left." Christopher smiled. The sound of her laughter, the sight of his son's smile, the warmth of home, these were treasures no title could buy. Taking Amelia's hand, he whispered softly, "I thought I had lost everything." She smiled through happy tears. But love found its way back. And as the sun set over Harrington Manor, the Duke realized that miracles did exist. Sometimes, they arrived disguised as ordinary moments. A child's laughter, a wife's smile, and the family he had never stopped praying for. The end.